Welcome back to the Bitcoin Zodiac. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of interviewing Max Hillebrand. He is a free software entrepreneur, praxeologist, crypto anarchist, and cypherpunk. He contributes to several open source projects and has a goal to help build a parallel economy based on sound money and individual sovereignty, where people can pursue their entrepreneurial ambitions without interference from central authorities. So he believes in the power of free markets and decentralized systems to create a better future. Today, we talk a lot about Bitcoin security. He's also the founder of Sound Money Solutions, which is a company that guides you through self-custody and privacy and your Bitcoin security. And so we talk a lot about that. We also talk about the ethos of Bitcoin, the cypherpunk movement and the crypto anarchists, and really the decades that preceded Bitcoin that sort of gave birth to Bitcoin. So I don't think that's talked about enough, and I really enjoyed talking about it with Max. We also touched on some philosophy and talking about self-sovereignty and also ways to cultivate self-trust. So it was a really interesting interview, and I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. Max Hillebrand, welcome to the Bitcoin Zodiac. How are
Thanks a
you?
lot, Claire, for the invite. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
For sure, for sure. I've got so much to talk to you about this evening. Lots of super interesting topics to cover. So why don't we just start with a brief intro of who you are, where you are, how you found yourself down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and how you founded Sound Money Solutions.
Yeah, my first love was economics. That was something that always fascinated me, and specifically monetary economics. I started out with more of the Keynesian school, but quickly realized that that doesn't make so much sense. So I looked for alternatives and ultimately found the Austrian School of Economics, which of course is spot on in so many very useful aspects. And I wanted to learn economics to kind of improve my entrepreneurial understanding and capacity, like to answer the big questions of why do we work in the first place. And Keynesian economics just totally missed that. They didn't explain anything useful on an entrepreneurial or business side. And Austrian economics, on the other hand, was spot on. Like they delivered one useful information after the other, basically. Um, and but then I first discovered Bitcoin and didn't really pay much attention to it because I didn't understand software, right? And what that whole area is about. So that was a later touch point where a friend helped me install Ubuntu, right, and Linux. And then I started to think more about code and software and what it means for different versions of code to exist, right? Proprietary closed source software versus free and open source software. And then when I then rediscovered Bitcoin a second time, it really made click and could understand that this is not just a sound economic protocol, but it's also free software. And those two things together are just miraculous. And then I went deep down the rabbit hole and never looked back since, and started to contribute to numerous different projects, projects that I used myself, and then I wanted them to be a little bit better. And I'm still not a coder after all these years, so I do everything but code, all the other stuff that needs fixing, which is
Right.
quite a lot actually. Even for software projects, a lot of work is not writing the code. A lot of work is the other stuff, and so I've been enjoying this ever since.
So the main thing that I kind of wanted to bring you on and chat to you about was really Bitcoin security and Bitcoin security, self-custody security in 2025, and sort of how it's evolved over the years, over the last couple of years especially, and if there are sort of any blind spots that people should be aware of when it comes to their Bitcoin security.
Yeah, that's the core issue, right? That Bitcoin tries to address. Bitcoin is base money in cyberspace, and the base money is an asset that you fully control, right? It's not a claim on something else that someone promises you to pay you back. It's the thing
Right.
itself, right? It's like physical gold. If you hold it, you own it, you have it. And that has never been possible in the digital realm before Bitcoin. And anything we had in cyberspace before was a promise that someone made to give you money in the future. But with Bitcoin, you have the capability of holding the money yourself without any counterparty risk, without any trusted third parties, without any intermediaries. And that is what makes Bitcoin truly special. Right. So this was something that over the last decade plus, the industry has innovated upon tremendously. Right. If you
Right.
look back into 2011 or something, the security of a Bitcoin wallet was horrendous. Right. Just something unencrypted on your computer that's connected to the internet.
Yeah.
But now, a decade later, we have numerous extremely useful and advanced tools for keeping your Bitcoin secure that previously only chief level executives or military general personnel had these type of hyper secure environments to keep secrets ultimately. So I think we can be quite thankful for the businesses in the Bitcoin space that made this technology, which has existed for a long time, but now it's for the first time really accessible for everyday people. So for a couple
Right.
$100, you can buy yourself a secure hardware wallet. And I think that alone is one of the most crucial steps you can take in your security. The hardware wallet is a dedicated computer that's from the ground up designed to keep your secrets ultimately, right? To keep a private key secure and private.
Yeah.
And there's now a plethora to choose from, and all of them are more or less okay. There's of course personal preferences. And then the second obvious aspect is to make a secure backup, right? So in case your computers start to fail or you lose access to your computer, you need to have a second way to remember the private keys. And this can be something as simple as paper. And paper is just fine. But paper has a couple critical flaws, and it's water and fire, right? The two basic elements.
Yeah.
And if paper gets wet, you can't read it anymore. And of course, if it burns, it's gone as well. So for the wetness, you can laminate it. That's actually quite simple, and does a decent improvement to the security. But of course, even lamination or plastic doesn't prevent fire. So here you could have a fireproof safe, which also prevents a third party from getting access to the paper, and if he doesn't have the key or the combination to the safe. So that is quite recommendable in any case. But then ultimately, steel protects against both fire and water. So there's now numerous steel engraving backup solutions that we could talk
Hmm.
about a bit more in the future, right? But ultimately, those are the two, I think, critical things of get yourself a hardware wallet, a clean computer dedicated for Bitcoin, and then make sure you have secure backups, preferably on steel.
Okay, fantastic. And I think one of the things that I find a little overwhelming when it comes to security is I really do try my best because I'm not like a native kind of like tech person. Like I'm not super excited about it. I'm not reading about it every day and the improvements every day. And one of the things that I find quite difficult about it is like when someone's trying to sell me something, or do I actually need it? So I know that you have an amazing company that sort of walks people through these steps so that they're not derailed by all these different things being sold to them. So what would like a like a standard sovereign setup kind of look like when you're working with someone from Sell Money Solutions?
Yeah, and Claire, I don't think that you're alone in this aspect, that you're excited about Bitcoin, but not excited about the nuances of the technology, right? Because
Yeah.
that's just a weird thing. Most people don't think about the money that much, right? And how to keep it safe. And that's where specialization and division of labor comes in, right?
Right.
And at Sound Money Solutions, we've curated a team of maniacs who live and breathe cybersecurity and Bitcoin security. And so to have someone to guide you and get you to ask the right questions ultimately, right?
Mhm.
This is the main thing, that you can waste a lot of time worrying about stuff that you shouldn't really worry about, and forgetting to worry about the actually important things. Um, so the hardcore package, so to say, I would say first of all starts with a risk assessment, right?
Right.
Like what do you have? Like what are your assets? And what do you want to protect, right? And whom do you want to protect it from? And who could help you in this quest of security?
Mhm.
These are some of the questions that really are required to make a good solution, right? It's very different if you're a lone wolf traveling with a backpack, versus you live in your village and you have like your 5 closest friends from childhood and you would trust them with your life. Right? These are two very different scenarios that deserve different technologies, different approaches to protecting it, right? So there is no one size fits all. There are some commonly best practices, but ultimately the main benefit is when you customize it. But so then there are a couple things that really make sense for everyone, I would say. And it starts with secure computers. Right? And that's not just the hardware wallet, that's actually your phone, where I would start. It makes a lot of sense to get a second phone that is optimized for security and where it designed to keep you private. Right? And here, Graphene OS is an operating system that really shines on these fronts. Right? So it's quite easy to install. Takes you maybe 30 minutes to an hour for the initial setup. And then you have an Android phone that doesn't have any references to Google. Right? You don't need to sign up with an account to use it. It works fully offline as well. So this is, I would say, a dedicated device to manage your wallets. And a device that you don't use to check your emails or open random PDFs or browse shady websites. Right? This is really just for managing your Bitcoin wallets. A big first step, right? Then another key aspect is a password manager. This is something that a lot of people actually don't have, but really makes sense for multiple reasons. First of all, humans are not good at generating random numbers. We're very predictable, so to say. And passwords should be long and they should be random and they should actually be difficult to remember. And so a password manager does that for you. A little bit like a Bitcoin wallet gives you 12 words for your seed phrase. You don't generate your own 12-word seed phrase, right? The computer does it for you, and that's good. And so a password manager specializes on that, but for everyday accounts like your email or Facebook accounts or whatever. Then second, it actually remembers and stores your passwords, right? And not just in clear text, like many people write it on paper in a diary, but whoever then gets your physical paper with all of your passwords, he has access to all of your accounts. So a password manager encrypts your passwords with a master password, so to say, so that the only password that you really do need to remember is the password to your password manager, because that decrypts and the file that has all of your passwords remembered. So for these two reasons, password managers are great. Right? They help you to generate secure passwords and they keep them securely encrypted so that if someone stumbles upon the USB stick where you have a backup of your passwords, they can just read it, which is super useful. And so after you have a secure phone and you started with your password manager, then I think you can ultimately start with adding hardware wallets to your scheme. Right? So here there's a plethora of different options to choose. My personal favorite is the Cold Card Q. It's a modern, highly up-to-date hardware wallet with a large screen, easy to read. It has a full keyboard, so you can manage it nicely, other than two flimsy buttons on the side, and can even scan QR codes easily with an integrated QR code scanner. Fully battery powered, so you can store it in your bunker. And you don't need to plug it into a wall or to a computer directly. So that's just one of the many options. And now the question is, do you want to have a way that only one hardware wallet or one seed phrase is required to spend your money? Which is quite fine. Or the alternative is that you have a multi-signature, right, where you have 3 different hardware wallets, and you need to get to 2 of these hardware wallets in order to spend the money. And this is quite an improvement in terms of security, but it comes with the downside of added complexity. Right now, you need to worry about 3 hardware wallets. You need to have 3 backups to each of these hardware wallets. Maybe you should have a passphrase on top of each of them. Right? So all of a sudden, there's 9 secrets that you need to keep securely, and then that becomes a bit more tricky. So for a lot of people, just a regular single signature wallet with a strong passphrase on top is perfectly fine. But if we're talking about larger amounts or something that you don't want to spend often, something that you want to keep for your great grandchildren, then multi-signature does become interesting. And here again, many different options of how to do it. Nunchuck is a wallet that I think works quite well. Works fine on the mobile phone as well. So I would install Graphene OS. I would install Nunchuck on this wallet together with your password manager, and then get either the Cold Card Q Oh yeah, that's one other thing, cool improvement of the multi-signature technologies. You can have multiple different hardware wallets from different vendors. Right? So you can get the cold card queue with the Foundation Passport and the Blockstream Jade, for example. And now you have three different hardware wallets from three different producers. If
Yeah,
any one of these producers starts, doing weird things,
right.
you're still going to be protected by the other two producers.
Okay. Okay, that's super interesting. And one of the things I wanted to talk about as well are the kind of like dangers. I think it's very common now for people to be buying their Bitcoin from an exchange. And obviously on these exchanges, you're KYC'd and you're also connecting to like a large corporation. And then if you're transferring, correct me if I'm wrong here, you're transferring your Bitcoin to a cold storage, you've just shared that information about that cold storage. You basically doxed yourself and that cold storage device. So you've connected that now to your name. Now, that may not sound like a big deal, but the whole kind of idea is for things to be yours, as you said, and for things to be private. So, do you have any sort of solutions and how people can operate with Bitcoin in the most private way possible?
Yeah, so by default, Bitcoin is not a perfectly private system. That's probably one of its major downsides, together with scalability, and those two come actually hand in hand. Bitcoin doesn't scale to many people because it's not private, because everyone has to verify every transaction of everyone else, right? That's a ludicrous system if you think about it like that. It's required, right, for many reasons, but
Yeah.
would be better if it were more private and more scalable. And so this means that whenever you get paid in Bitcoin, that the person who sent you the money can see
Yeah.
how long you're holding on to that money in the future, right? And when you're spending that money, and potentially what other transactions did you make to receive your Bitcoin in the past, right? All of
Yeah.
this information can be understood by someone who sends you Bitcoin. Um, and now the question is, whom would you like to have this information, right? And of course, the obvious way that most people get their hands on Bitcoin is to go to a corporation and a Bitcoin exchange and send fiat via bank transfer to that exchange, and in exchange get Bitcoin for that. But now that exchange knows how much Bitcoin you bought and where you sent them to and how long you're holding on to them, etc. And well, potentially you don't want a random third-party company in some shady jurisdiction to know this, right? And then I guess there's a couple other ways of doing it. One would be to trade with your friends. That's my preferred way of doing it. You don't only
Right.
have to get your Bitcoin from exchanges. You can actually get them from humans, right? Bitcoin is human technology after all. And
Right.
and so what would, for example, be interesting is go to a local meetup and find a local Bitcoin community, get to know the people there,
Yeah.
and then buy and sell Bitcoin in your local community, right? Or even better if that's in the family. And so this is one way, but then again, you have to be careful that that person who does send you the money now has this information of how long you're holding on to it, etc.
Right.
And here, this might be a risk if it's a random stranger that you met on the street. And then, unfortunately, there have been cases where people were attacked by the traders that they met for in-person trades, simply because they
Mhm.
found out, hey, this guy actually has a lot of Bitcoin. He's been buying it for a long time. So let's visit him with a $5 wrench and try to get all of his Bitcoin back. Right? Um, it's a shame, but this is unfortunately what has happened and what will continue to happen in the future. So
Mhm.
here, finding trustworthy people to do these trades with is definitely preferred. But I think in the long run, the best way to get the Bitcoin is not to exchange them for fiat, but to exchange them for goods and services, and just offer the work
Right.
that you do for Bitcoin. And this way, you have a much more, yeah, de-risked and decentralized way of acquiring your Bitcoin.
Agree with you as well. I think that we should be starting to use it more and more. And actually, it's sort of becoming like easier to use. Like more people are wanting Bitcoin or understanding Bitcoin, and more people are wanting to operate in Bitcoin. But if I buy eggs with my Bitcoin, I don't really want my egg vendor knowing all of the details about my transactions and how much Bitcoin I hold and all of those kind of things as well, because that does then become a security issue.
So there are two. major privacy technologies in Bitcoin today that work extremely well. Let's start with the one on the blockchain, and that's called a coin join. And so
Yeah.
specifically Wasabi Wallet does this really well. Instead of you making a transaction by yourself all alone, right, spending the money that you earn for selling eggs on the butcher or whatever. Um,
Mhm.
so this would be a transaction where you include the coins that you've received from the eggs and you put the address of the butcher on the output side. And now both the butcher and the egg customers can see that they are somehow related in this transaction. Um,
Good.
so in order to fix that, what we do is basically to team up, right, to get a group of people together and to make one single transaction that combines smaller payments of hundreds of people. And that's
Yeah.
ultimately what a coin join is, right? Strength in numbers. You make a transaction with your friends or strangers, right? And so Wasabi Wallet does that fully automatic, all in the background. You don't really have to worry about it so much. You just receive Bitcoin, you wait, a couple hours, couple days. The longer you wait, the better ultimately. And then you make a payment afterwards, right? You spend your money and you don't really have to worry much about the nuances. So that's for blockchain level privacy. And that's of course great for larger amounts, right? But if you're selling a dozen eggs, then it might not be worth to go to the blockchain with this. And so here the Lightning Network comes in. And the
Mhm.
Lightning Network is a privacy improvement, not because it increases the size of the crowd on the transactions of the blockchain, but because it removes transactions from the blockchain entirely. Right?
Right.
These are the off-chain transactions, which are much faster, much cheaper, and more private, simply because most people on the world don't need to know about the Lightning transaction happening. Only the sender and receiver and a couple routing nodes in the middle know that this transaction is happening. And so this means that there is no permanent record of your transactions publicly available. And specifically, if you're receiving money, then the sender has no idea where you're sending that money to in the future. And the
Mhm.
sender has great privacy against the receiver. So if you're now spending your money at the butcher has no idea where you got that money from and when you got that money from, right? Or who is even making that payment in the first place. So the Lightning Network is commonly used, right, in many different wallets.
Yeah.
Phoenix is a great self-custodial Lightning wallet for the phone that works extremely reliable. Has quite great privacy benefits against outside observers. There is a little bit of a caveat here with that the wallet operator, the company behind that wallet, they do have some information about the users of their wallets. So to make an even better private approach would be to run your own Lightning node and manage your own channels, route payments for other people as well. That would
Yeah.
be a benefit for increasing privacy further.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So many amazing recommendations. And so now I want to pivot a little bit and go into sort of what makes Bitcoin different and why we care so much about self-custody, like why it matters to us so much, why it's such a, I mean, I think it's the greatest feature of Bitcoin is that we can self-custody. And yet, in so many ways, a lot of Bitcoiners are choosing to circumnavigate that just to kind of capitalize on the upside movement of the number go up technology, which is fine. I'm not criticizing number go up technology. I'm a trader, so I love that. I think when um, you're wanting to hold Bitcoin, one of the greatest purposes is that it is something that you can actually own. And so I want to go into a little bit about self-sovereignty, really the foundations of Bitcoin, how Bitcoin came about, and the cypherpunk movement behind it, and some crypto anarchy thrown in as well. So let's have a chat about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like self-custody is the killer feature of Bitcoin. And as I said,
Mm,
it's the first time we can actually hold something ourselves online, and that's just a full game changer. And it enables us to actually not invest. And if you hold money, if you save money, it's the opposite of an
mhm.
investment. And it basically means that you're telling all the entrepreneurs that, hey, I don't want to invest in your company. I don't want to buy your product. I want to save my money for future entrepreneurs, right, to offer better services. So this means that we show our interest in the market that, hey, we don't need yet another cheap plastic toy. Produce
Right.
something better. And this allows entrepreneurs to work harder on something that ultimately we would like, right? So it's a big market incentive to de-invest, right? To build less, but to build something better in the future. And that, that's a big superpower. And sure, you could, go into debt in order to buy more Bitcoin. Um, but then you're kind of continuing the old system that hasn't really served us all too well.
Right.
Bitcoin is powerful because you cannot print more of it. And that's kind of the whole raison d'etre of, hey, this is something that cannot be inflated at will, which of course is a problem. If we start to increase the money supply, then that ultimately means that we're starting a chain of theft, right? Where the people who receive the newly created money first, they gain at the expense of those who receive the newly created money second or later on, right? So this is a transfer of wealth to the people higher on the top of the pyramid, so to say. And if you would increase, debt and take out a new loan to buy more Bitcoin, then you're just perpetuating the scheme of increasing the money supply in fiat, right? And sure, there might be a good reason to buy more Bitcoin with it, uh, but ultimately that perpetuates a cycle of violence that I don't think needs to be perpetuated.
Agree.
So this, I agree with you that we don't really need to have these massive hoarding campaigns, so to say, and increasing the fiat money supply, uh, because that increases so much uncertainty and so many difficulties on the entrepreneurial level that Bitcoin doesn't really, or that you don't have to do with just holding Bitcoin, right? It's the easiest thing to do is save your money, right? Like there's no entrepreneurial risk. There's no uncertainty if your employees are going to show up or if the customers will be there in the future. You literally put a rock under your mattress and that's it, right? It's stupid simple. But that's refreshing too, right? When you actually don't need to trade all the time just to stay afloat. When saving money, like the boring way, is enough to be prosperous, that's a quite special thing that we haven't had in a long time. It was there arguably with gold, but even gold increased its money supply quite substantially over time. So with Bitcoin being absolutely hard limited, um, that that seems to me that saving will be quite rewarded in the future without much risk.
Yeah, it also introduces a level of fairness. So I remember when I first was really sort of started to go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and one of the things that bothered me so much was everywhere I looked, it was this corrosive sort of quality of fiat money, basically. Like it's corroded so many areas of our society that actually have nothing to do with money, character,
Yeah.
relationships, just everything. And the only way that I could kind of stay sane and not be in a bad mood all the time was to flip that around and recognize that if we introduce some integrity back into the money, that we can heal some of those aspects. And I think as well, the massive discrepancy as well between wealth has been the fact that the savings mechanism, the ability to save and build, has been taken away from the vast majority of people unless you're able to filter some of that fiat printed money into investments and ride out that inflation wave. You're at a huge disadvantage if you don't have the understanding to do that, or you don't have the ability to do that. So I think that's one of the most powerful things about Bitcoin as well, is that it allows people to save again, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like this is one of the powerful aspects of Bitcoin again, right? That you don't need to be an expert in financial engineering in order to become wealthy, right? In fact, again, you just need to hold the dumb rock under your mattress. That's something that everyone can do. And it's even cheaper to do than with gold, right? To have physical ownership over gold is quite difficult.
Yeah.
But if physical ownership over your Bitcoin is just 12 words that you put on an encrypted USB stick or memorize in your head, all of a sudden the cost of securely holding money has been decreased substantially, right? And that means it's much more accessible for anyone to come along and make that economic choice and send that signal into the market that, hey, I don't want to buy yet another flat on leverage on credit. just to put my wealth somewhere. I really just want to save and keep the money for my future generations. That is a really powerful equalizer, so to say. And I agree with you that it comes with tremendous consequences on so many things that we wouldn't necessarily or traditionally classify as being related to the money.
Right.
But yeah, character changes and are extremely substantial. And I really like the work of John Vallis, a podcaster from a couple of years back, who was really chronicled this character transformation of a lot of Bitcoiners. And I think it's something that happens so frequently that it cannot be overlooked, right? That people deeply change and they start to care a lot more about themselves and about the future and their children and the environment and everything. So this is really something where I'm extremely excited for how humanity will look in 50, 100 years from now when children grow up on a Bitcoin standard and then what they will achieve. It's going to be a wild ride to watch.
Absolutely. Yeah, I use this example quite a lot actually, but like in different sort of modes of modality, spiritual modalities, like you have kind of like two different paths in relationship to material wealth. And one path is sort of the Buddhist non-attachment, and even the Christian sort of, denial of the flesh and that kind of thing. And so it's a very much denial-based sort of idea around materialism and material wealth. And then on the other side of it, you kind of have the mystics that have this sort of philosophy of like, manifest everything that you have ever wanted in this world as fast as possible, realize that it's not it, and then you can really get on with the work that you were meant to do when you came here. And one of the things I find really interesting about the Bitcoin community is Bitcoin actually kind of allows people to do that. Like if they've saved Bitcoin for a while, or they've been stacking sats for a while, their families' needs are maybe taken care of, their own personal needs. They've manifested maybe a few desires that they wanted, and they're like, hey, hang on a second, like this isn't it, like I'm here for more than this. And it allows them to get on the other side of that. And there's something like super exciting. Like I'm very much a utopian thinker in a way, but like, what does humanity look like with, coming from that perspective, right? I think that that's a really exciting idea to sort of think about.
Yeah, that's so true. And there's kind of this saying the Bitcoiners are selling their shares in order to stack more sats. And it's like the ultimate minimalist lifestyle, so to say, of you really don't need to have a Lambo, you don't need to have a yacht and a mansion. Um, and you'll actually be totally happy without this. Like life isn't so much about the material goods, right? Like obviously we want to solve our problems, but more Lambo
Right.
usually doesn't solve more problems. It usually bring up more problems.
Amazing. So one of the things that I kind of am committed to this year when I'm interviewing people is I want to talk about the origins of Bitcoin and the philosophy behind it, because I just don't think that it's spoken about enough. And I think for people that have been in Bitcoin for a long time, it's kind of a given that we have this understanding of like the cypherpunks and what they're about, and what why Bitcoin was created, what problems it was here to solve. And but I think for brand new people that come into the space, maybe they've come because Eric Trump told them to come, or varying different degrees of like why. And so can we just have a little bit of, I know that you're kind of quite experienced in that space. Can you give an idea of like the philosophy around that and the sort of world that the cypherpunks wanted to see and were helping to create in a very kind of like free and open way?
Yeah, that's a fascinating line of thought because Bitcoin doesn't come out of a vacuum, right? Bitcoin is steeped in history for a long time. And ultimately it started with computers and computer science. And then very quickly people realizing that hey, we can actually encrypt our messages, right? We can have a way that we don't need to trust a server administrator with keeping our secrets. We can use this very simple math formula with large numbers that now we can actually compute thanks to having computers to send encrypted messages, ciphertext, through the internet, so that only one person can read it. Right? And so this was a groundbreaking realization in like the 70s, of hey, private public key cryptography exists. It's strong, it's unbreakable. Um, what do we do with it? What does that mean for humanity? And so out of this movement, the cypherpunks were born, right? Cipher standing for encryption, right? To hide something, to conceal something. And punks as we don't have to ask for permission anymore, right? We can just use these math formulas on our own machines and carry the consequences forward. And they started out on a mailing list ultimately, right? To where emails were sent back and forth to a group of people, and this was really small in the 70s and 80s, like maybe 10 to 50 people who were actively involved in this, and they just talked about math to a large extent. Hey, look at this new encryption scheme, or look at what we can do with these hash functions and so on. But then they very quickly also talked about just humanity, right? There was a lot of kind of transhumanism of what does it mean if humans get augmented by machines, right? Where does that end up at scale? There was a lot of philosophical talk, right? Of what are, because this was such a new frontier, the question of what should we be doing here, what is good or what is not good to do, really came up quite prevalently. So a lot of ethics, and then a lot of political philosophy. And here specifically, the crypto anarchists, I would say, are equally as important as the cypherpunks. So again, crypto meaning cryptography, right? To hide, to conceal, and then anarchy coming from un-archon, right? Un without an archon ruler. The idea was to create a space in cyberspace that is not ruled by others, right? Where coercion and violence is no longer a means to stop people from doing something, right? Where people are free to do their computation and do their communication and do their transactions without trusting on a third party, without any middlemen. These were the fundamental, I guess, spiritual underpinnings that eventually led to Bitcoin, right? Because people really were saying that, hey, we have this new realm, and now we can do commerce, right? We can transact, and we can do so without revealing who we are, where we are, right? Now you can sell your services globally, regardless how old you are, what religion you're, or where you were born. It was the great equalizer, so to say. And then, of course, if you want to do commerce securely, you basically need two things quite foundationally. You need to have secure communication, and again, a communication that cannot be intercepted and read and manipulated by others. Right? That if you make someone an offer to acquire a good, that a third party cannot just change the price that you're offering, for example. Right? So securely encrypted and securely authenticated communication was one of the key pillars. And this was addressed early on with, for example, PGP, right? The pretty good privacy protocol, which utilized RSA encryption and signatures to send messages securely via email, mainly. And so this was quite the spicy technology that eventually the government classified as military ammunition. And you were not allowed to tell foreigners about the secret math formula, which of course is ludicrous because information longs to be free, and the internet is inherently global. So that government effort to thwart and stomp down on the system quickly failed. Well, not so quickly, but it did fail. And of course now we have encryption and signatures in use every day by everyone all the time. Like the call that we're doing is encrypted by strong cryptography between our devices and the server, or even peer-to-peer. Right? So this is HTTPS, right? Everyone sees the lock on the browser. Encryption is everywhere, right? So this part of the cypherpunk dream has totally been fulfilled. But then the other requirement for commerce was money, obviously, right? If you're providing a service or a good in cyberspace, then you ought to get paid for that in order to provide it at scale. And here, the first digital payment system was introduced in 1983. That's over 40 years ago, and was called Chaumian eCash. It utilized a beautiful cryptographic trick called a blind signature, which basically enabled a payment system where a server takes care of finalizing the payment transactions, but the server has no idea who is paying whom, right, or which transaction is linked to which other transaction. So the first digital payment system had perfect privacy, so to say, and that was really mind blowing, right? It was, and worked quite well. Um, but the issue here was that there was one central server in the middle who defined the rules of this payment system and who could increase the amount of tokens in the payment system at will. Right, so he basically could inflate the money supply, and that led to all types of problems. But primarily, the problem was it was easy to shut down, right? And governments were very much not in favor of people having these freedom technologies. Could just go to that company and plug out the servers and throw everyone in jail and torture them there, right? So this unfortunately happened numerous times. Um, and so throughout those last 30 years or something, Cypherpunks continuously iterated on how can we make these online payment systems more reliable, right, more private, and especially more resilient, that it's not possible to shut them down as easily. And this is where in 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto comes along and publishes to the Cypherpunk mailing list an email saying that, hey, I think I got something here on providing a secure peer-to-peer decentralized payment system that is not controlled by a third party, that doesn't have a special privileged server in the middle, but where we're just peers on the network. And for each of us defines the rules of this monetary system, and we verify everyone else is playing according to the rules that we set out initially. And if anyone breaks them, we enforce that by kicking him off our network. And so this removed, this distributed the obligation to keep the system running, so that everyone, as long as one person or two persons on the world are taking on the responsibility of running the software and providing the system, it continues to work. And because we all check on each other, it makes cheating the system impossible ultimately. Right? So as long as you're running a full node and you verify your incoming transaction according to those rules that you set out, you cannot be cheated by getting paid with weak money that has been inflated or stolen from someone else. And so Bitcoin is the culmination of, well, 4 or 5 decades of work of cypherpunks and crypto anarchists that got together to build the technologies for a freer future ultimately. And it utilizes a lot of the tools of the cypherpunks, especially specifically signatures and hash functions, to really make sure that we have a secure and trustworthy payment system and base money in cyberspace.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think we're in an age as well where this is one of the most beautiful things that I think about Bitcoin is that, and we actually all could learn something from Bitcoin, is that Bitcoin just does what Bitcoin does. And it keeps on doing what it keeps on doing. And it's sort of, there's no marketing team, although some would say that there are a few of us like pushing the message out there, but it just does what it does. It doesn't respond to all the hype that is generated around it. It doesn't shrink when everybody's hating on it and rejecting it and whatever. And it just keeps on its mission, and just the next block comes, right? And it's actually like everything else in our world is kind of actually falling apart or showing itself to be not as solid or reliable or trustworthy as it may have appeared 50 years ago. And that's kind of what is making Bitcoin look like a more reliable option, in terms of like sound money, I think. And I kind of love that. But I think one of the things that I want to talk about with you as well is really this idea of self-sovereignty and of freedom, because definitely one of the things that comes up whenever I speak to people about Bitcoin, we've had a few new all-time highs recently, so I always get some messages asking about Bitcoin. And one of the things that people always ask is like, well, who says that there'll only ever be 21 million? And this question kind of makes my blood boil in a way. Not that I'm angry at the person that's asking it, but just that we are so programmed to need permission for everything. We need someone's permission for everything. And I think it's really something, again, that has eroded society and has done a lot of damage to humanity. This idea that we need a ruler and we need permission. And however, if we want to step out of that and recognize that we don't, we need to be able to have some trust in our own decision-making abilities and and develop some self-trust. So do you sort of have any direction on how you've cultivated self-trust over the years?
Yeah, to your question, to the earlier question of
Mm.
who's going to decide that there's 21 million in the future, the crazy answer is you are. It's
Right.
fully up to you of how much supply the money has that you're using. And that's the crazy realization of you define the rules of the money. You verify the rules and you enforce the rules. It's absolutely
Yeah.
up to you. And that is full self-responsibility, self-reliance, so to say. And that might be a scary thing, right? But it's also an extremely liberating thing. It's
Right.
scary because what if you make a mistake, right? It's then fully your responsibility, and nobody really can get you out of it other than you by changing your mind and fixing it, right? But it also means that you're no longer beholden to others to make these decisions for you. And guess what? Others don't always have your best interest at mind, right? I guess the person who has your best interest at mind is usually you, because if you don't, then you die. And so the self-preservation is quite fundamental to living organisms. And then sure, this extends to your close family, to your loved ones and close friends, but certainly doesn't extend to a random dude on the other side of the planet. And with how large nowadays bureaucracies continue to get, then that's literally whom you're
Right.
ruled by. So
Yeah.
here's like people in Brussels, people in Washington or wherever, they don't care about you, unfortunately. But you care a lot about them, and you do what they say, which is really not necessary. That's, I guess, the cypherpunk, the part with the punk, right? You don't have to ask for permission. You don't have to wait until someone else solves your problem. You can just
Mhm.
do it, right? And actually doing it is not just fun, but it's also cheap, right? It's and not really that difficult. And it again puts so much responsibility on our shoulders, which might be a burden, right? But ultimately, if you want the inflation to stop, right? If you don't like prices continuously going up and things becoming unaffordable, well, I'm sorry to break it to you, but it was your doing, right? You chose which money you want to get paid in. You chose which money you're going to hold your wealth in, right? And there was a lot of active participation of yourself in your own enslavement, right? And
Mm.
well, that's a scary realization, but it's also a very liberating realization of you can make it stop very easily. You can make it stop
Right.
today, right? Get rid of your savings in fiat, right? Save in hard assets that don't get inflated, and work with people who honor your choice and agree on paying you in a peaceful and honest money. Right? This is absolutely doable. Um, so I guess that's in part of how to wake up and increase that self-reliance is to realize that it's really up to you. Nobody's coming to save you. Yes, the house is on fire, um, but you can just fix it, walk out and put the fire down. And there is actually no one really in your way other than your perceived power of authority. But a lot of this is just the perception of authority over you. It's this kind
Right.
of panopticon thing where you have a round room full of cells and just one guy watching in the middle. He can only watch one cell at a time, but all the other inmates don't know if the guard is watching them at the moment, and so they just act as if he were watching all the time. But the fact of reality is they're not watching all the time. And even if they were watching, they don't have the capability of putting you down all the time, right? So um, a lot of the current harm and suffering is self-imposed, unfortunately. But again, it can be very easily fixed with courage, yes. Um, but courage can be learned, and once learned, it's applicable across different areas. Right? So you might not need to pick up the courage on you know uh, leaving your country and moving to a more free place, because that might be a quite harsh step to take right at front, right? But you could maybe pick up your courage to save a little bit in Bitcoin, right? And then move on to not using Google that much anymore, right? But using more self-reliant technologies, and just slowly and iteratively improving your security and your setup on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. And before you know, in a couple of years, you would be awe-inspired on how much you could actually achieve by very small and manageable steps that you could take with a little bit of consistency and commitment.
Right. Right. And it's one of those things that once you start to step out and you do that, that's like a self-trust building mechanism anyway. As you step out, you realize you can do
Yeah.
that. You also describe yourself as a praxeologist. So can you describe that a little bit and how that kind of feeds into this? And those are more practical way of doing things. How does the sort of more philosophical way of doing things, how do you view that? How does
Yeah,
that
so
guide you?
praxeology basically is economics, right? So praxeology is Latin for the study of human action, coined by Ludwig von Mises, one of the great economists of the 20th century. And ultimately, it's the science or logic of human action, which again shows it's extremely practical. It's not some pie in the sky armchair economist. It's some real boots on the ground. How can we solve our problems? And what are the consequences of different strategies? Um, and so I guess the one of the prime achievements or importance for me in terms of economics is monetary economics, right? Like
Mhm.
I understood the evils of fiat and the massive problems of increasing the money supply long before I discovered Bitcoin. And that uh, by the way, is a very depressive state to be in when you understand the problem but you don't see a solution yet. And the problem was obvious for 100 years, right? That hey, we shouldn't mess with the money supply and especially not increase it all the time. This was known, but there wasn't really anything that we could do about it back then, because dissent was too costly, right? Moving to an alternative system was too costly, and to coordinate that properly was too costly. But that's then where again Bitcoin comes in as a beautiful solution, to make the descent cheaper, and to make coordination more affordable, more practical. So in this sense, economics really taught me that for one, there is a problem, but also there is a solution, right? At least in theory. Um, and then the cypherpunk philosophy really showed me that hey, you can just do it. You really you, there's no two ways about it. Just build a better future. And I guess also that we don't really need mass adoption. We don't need everyone on this planet to agree with us and to agree that a hard money is better, that stopping to steal is better. Um, we can build a parallel economy, a second realm, so to say, that does
Right.
not rely on everyone joining us here. Right? Because if that were the case, then well, we would be quite screwed, to be honest. Like if we need everyone to do as we want, then we're I guess the only practical solution here is tyranny again, to force
Mhm.
others to use our systems. But that's
Right.
exactly what we don't want, right? And so the cool realization is that we don't need to convince anyone. We The system works just fine, even if we're a small group of people. Sure, it works better the more people are involved. There's more division of labor, more capital accumulation, and so on. So sure, let's evangelize and get other people to join us. But ultimately, um, this is a system that works even at the small scale, and the only one preventing you from joining the system at the small scale is you. And sure, there might be some strategic nuance needed to really make a secure exit out of the first realm of coercion and live a more free
Yeah.
life. But those steps are easily takeable. And so yeah, the economics part really taught me about the magnitude of the problem, and the theoretical solution.
Mm.
And I guess then it encouraged me to keep looking for the practicalities and how to put these things in action.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think it's interesting because it's like a different way. of looking at it. Like, I think from a masculine perspective, it's much more strategic in that way. Whereas for me, like from a kind of like feminine perspective, I'm much more about like building self-trust through my own intuition and being less like action or outcome orientated in a sense. It's like I care more about where the decision I'm making comes from. Like, am I making that decision because someone that I think is interesting told me to? And so I'm just going to go along with it? Or did I take information and make my own decision? That's really important to me because I can
Mm.
live with getting it wrong if it came from me and I analyzed everything and I made that decision. I can live with that. But I can't live with getting it
Mm.
wrong when I took in everybody else's opinion and went with that when I knew something different. Like that I struggled to live with. So I think that's like an interesting, like different dynamic. But yeah, where do you see Bitcoin in the next 10 to 15 years? Where do you see the Bitcoin community? How do you see Bitcoin impacting humanity? What does that outlook look like? I'm not going to hold you to it, but like it's interesting to see where you see that going.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin will continue to exist in 10 years, and it will hopefully exist for a much longer time. And
Yeah.
I would speculate that still the vast majority of the network follows same or similar rules that we have at the moment. Right? So there will only be 21 million. Um, there will be like what 20.5 million Bitcoin already issued, so very close to the maximum. Blocks are still being produced, transactions are still being made. So the system will be stable and secure. Um, and then the question is, what are the consequences of that? Well, we've made theft uneconomical, right? It's no longer economical to print more money. Right? The more fiat money they print, that money will instantly be liquidated and move towards Bitcoin. So most likely the increase of money supply on the fiat realm has either stopped or has increased to a point where the fiat currencies have become completely irrelevant. And not just therefore have we stopped the inflation theft, but we've also greatly decreased the theft of money units, so to say, because of secure ways of holding Bitcoin, multi-signature, vaults, time blocks, all of these things. Um, it will become much less prevalent to actually steal from people, specifically their money. Right now, there might still be theft happening of real estate, right? And state actors will continue to try to tax their citizenship. But most likely, numerous jurisdictions will have decreased the totalitarian regime substantially compared to what we see today, simply because it's no longer profitable and people have been fleeing their systems at unheard of numbers. So I think the number of cypherpunks will be at an all-time high in that time. Everyone will be, not everyone, many people will be using strong encryption and secure communications and of course secure money. And the markets will be flourishing. I think we'll have an unprecedented rise of free exchange, with more and more problems being solved, problems that today we would believe unimaginably to be solved, and that the capital accumulated will be huge. Right? Um, Now that's at least for those people who do embrace Bitcoin and freedom technologies. For those who do stick around in the fiat empire, they will get squeezed harder and harder and harder, and as the tax base shrinks because free men leave the vicinity, then those who are left will have to carry the burden of the theft of the system on fewer shoulders, right? So this will become more and more ugly, and the steps taken by the governments will become more and more extreme, and um, the extent of manipulation and propaganda and theft, both physical and I guess spiritual, will be quite staggering. So it's going to be, I think, a rather polarized world in 10 years or so, where the outcomes of a fiat economy and the outcomes of a Bitcoin free economy will be extremely obvious to see for those with the courage to look. But simultaneously, the amount of propaganda and lies on the fiat side will be substantial as well. So it will be a wild ride the next 10 years. I think that's guaranteed.
Yeah, it's fun though. Well, Max,
Yeah,
thank you
fun
so.
and I guess an adventure.
Exactly, exactly. And I think it's interesting because obviously my podcast is called the Bitcoin Zodiac, so I understand Bitcoin's astrology like really intimately. And it's very much like a hero's journey. You know, it's not a like easy road. I mean, you can't even make it up, to be honest, how kind of accurate Bitcoin's natal chart and all of these kind of things are and describing it. But it's definitely not a like an easy journey. It's definitely one that is like the battles come, but they invariably make it stronger, you know? It's not like an easy, cruisy life, but yeah, I think it's exciting. I think it's fun to be a part of as well.
Absolutely, it's a journey of a lifetime. I
Yeah.
think, and like we can be quite glad for being here at that moment. I guess that's why we chose, this timeline to be alive, because
Exactly.
it really is a crazy phenomenon to see a new money being adopted by the economy. That's already a big thing. But then not just to discover a new rock or something, but to literally engineer the money and build it from the ground up. That is wild. That hasn't happened really in the past, or I guess it did with fiat, but back then it was mainly guided by theft and by lying and trickery.
Right.
Now to do it in the open in a free protocol, it just is next level. So I'm really excited to be along the ride.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, what a time to be alive. Like there's so much happening and I think we can get really stuck in the like darkness of like the world in a way, but there's so much like exciting stuff happening. You're right. We did choose to be here at this time, so we should make the most of it at least.
Yeah, exactly. No, and it is a tough, like it can be very depressing to be in such dark times, but then it's worth to just touch some grass and get grounded and
Exactly.
realize that hey, it's not all that bad. We can make it a lot better. So sometimes you need the darkness in order to see the light. And I guess we should be thankful for that.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I love this chat. Is there anything else that you wanted to share before we finish?
Yeah, I guess one first of all, thanks of all, Claire, for the invite. I really enjoyed our conversation here, and I'm looking forward to hear more of your natal chart analysis of Bitcoin. That would be an interesting show, by the way, to do an in-depth dive on that. Um, and maybe one recommendation would be a book called A Lodging of Wayfaring Men by Paul
Okay.
Rosenberg. The audiobook is available on the Parallel Society podcast for free. And this actually tells a story based on the true happenings of a group of early cypherpunks in the 1990s who built one of the first anonymous monies and anonymous marketplaces and company registration systems, etc. Really a beautiful story. And it goes not just into the technology, but especially into the philosophy and the spirituality or religious aspects of the cypherpunk movement and crypto anarchy as a whole.
Wow.
It really is an incredible book that I could only recommend. And it's one of those few Bitcoin books that's first of all not really about Bitcoin because it was written before Bitcoin, but
Right.
that is more about the technology and kind of the more spiritual side of it. So that is something I can very much recommend. And then yeah, check out Sound Money Solutions if you want to increase your security of your holdings. Be happy to have a call and walk through seeing where we can make your system a little bit better.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll put all of the details in the description as well. But again, thank you so much for joining me, and I will talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Bye bye.